white phosphorus screams through the air above St. Lo. Men are burning. Their voices crack with terror as they cry out the same desperate words. "Doc, I'm hit. It's so hot. I'm burning up." 19-year-old Al Torborg runs toward the screaming. Not away from it. Toward it. He's a combat medic with Baker Company, 35th Infantry Division, replacing the last medic who was killed doing exactly what Al is doing right now. And through the smoke and chaos of that French battlefield in July 1944, he can see something that will haunt him for the next 80 years. On the other side of no man's land, another medic is running too. But this one wears a German uniform. What happens next sounds impossible. In the middle of one of history's bloodiest wars, these two enemies will do something that defies everything we think we know about combat. They're going to talk to each other. This is the story of Al Torborg, the combat medic who survived the entire European campaign from D-Day to Berlin, who met General Patton multiple times, who witnessed the liberation of concentration camps, and who lived to be 100 years old. But more than that, this is a story about what happens when humanity survives, even in war's darkest moments. And it starts with a letter that arrives in May 1943. Al Torborg is 19 years old when the draft notice arrives at his Minnesota home. The year is 1943. America has been at war for a year and a half, and the military needs men. Lots of men. Al doesn't get to choose his path. Few do. At Camp Robinson, Arkansas, the new recruits line up. Half will train for armor, half will train as medics. Al ends up in the medic group. It's not what he expected, but in war, expectations mean nothing. The training is intense. How to stop bleeding under fire. How to recognize shock. How to move wounded men without killing them in the process. How to stay alive while everyone around you is a target. But here's what the training can't prepare you for. The sound. The smell. The weight of knowing that the last guy who had your job died doing it. By spring of 1945, Al is crossing the Atlantic on a transport ship. 11.5 days in submarine-infested waters. German U-boats are hunting Allied convoys, and they're good at it. 4 other transports go down after the convoy moves beyond air support range. Al makes it across. He arrives in England around D-Day, June 6, 1944. The beaches of Normandy are a meat grinder. Wave after wave of casualties pour into the field hospitals where Al works. Men with limbs missing. Men with their insides on the outside. Men who will die no matter what Al does. And men who will live only if he does everything exactly right. Boys, really. Most of them are just boys. Then in July 1944, Al gets his orders. He's going to France. To the front lines. To Baker Company, 320th Regiment, 35th Infantry Division. He's replacing their last combat medic, the one who was just killed in action. St. Lo in the summer of 1944 is hell with a French accent. The Normandy hedgerows are perfect for defense and terrible for attack. Every field is a fortress. Every hedge hides machine guns. The Germans have turned this pastoral countryside into a killing ground, and the Americans are paying for every yard in blood. Al Torborg arrives as a replacement, which means 2 things. First, you're the new guy, and nobody wants to get too attached because replacements die fast. Second, you're now responsible for keeping alive men who've already watched friends die. No pressure. The artillery starts almost immediately. The Germans love their artillery. They're good at it. Terrifyingly good. You could hear it zing through the air. Al would remember decades later. The sound becomes part of you. You learn to judge distance by sound. You learn which whistle means you have time and which means you're already dead. Then come the voices. "Doc, I'm hit." That's your cue. That's when you run toward the danger, while every instinct screams at you to find a hole and stay there. You run because that's the job. Because someone ran for the guy before you when he got hit. Because if you don't run, the wounded man dies. And sometimes you run straight into something you never expected. Al remembers treating wounded soldiers while under fire, crawling through mud and blood, trying to stop arterial bleeding with German machine guns chattering overhead. He remembers the weight of morphine syrettes in his pocket, each one a small mercy for men in unbearable pain. But he also remembers something else. Through the smoke and the screaming, he sees a German medic doing the exact same thing on the other side of the field. Enemy uniform. Same job. Same desperation to save lives while the killing continues around them. And then, impossibly, they start talking. I remember sometimes I would be out running around treating wounded, and I could see the German medic doing the same, Al recalled. Often I would talk with the German medic to let him know what I did to his soldiers, and he would tell me what he's done to my American soldiers. Think about that for a moment. In the middle of combat, with bullets flying and artillery falling, two medics from opposite sides exchange information about how to keep each other's soldiers alive. In that way, we sort of work together, Al said. It struck me as odd at first. But the German medic and I had a kind of kinship in that we only wanted to help the wounded. It did not matter what uniform they wore. This wasn't in the training manual. This wasn't what anyone back home imagined when they thought about war. But this was real. This happened. Two men who were supposed to be enemies, finding a thread of shared humanity in the worst place imaginable. The Geneva Convention protected medics, in theory. Both sides were supposed to leave them alone. In practice, that protection was worth exactly nothing when artillery shells didn't discriminate, and stray bullets didn't check your armband before they hit you. So these medics, American and German, found their own way. A nod across the battlefield, a shouted update, information that might save a life. But the fighting doesn't stop for anyone's humanity. The 35th Infantry Division pushes forward through France. Always forward. That's what General George Patton demands, and that's what Third Army delivers. Al Torborg meets Patton multiple times during the campaign. This isn't some brief handshake for a photo op. Al actually talks to him, sees how he interacts with enlisted men, watches how he leads. I think the biggest reason we liked Patton was because he cared about the enlisted man, Al remembered. This matters because Patton's reputation is complicated. He's famous for slapping shell-shocked soldiers, for his profanity, for his aggressive tactics that get men killed in pursuit of victory. But to the men of Third Army, Patton is something else. He's the general who empowers his NCOs, who disciplines fairly, who makes them believe they're part of something unstoppable. When Third Army moves, we make headlines, Patton tells his troops constantly. And they do. Through France, through Belgium, into Germany itself. But first, they have to survive winter. Then December 1944. The Ardennes Forest, the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler launches his last major offensive on the Western Front, catching the Allies by surprise. The German attack smashes through American lines, creating a bulge in the front that threatens to split the Allied forces in two. The 35th Infantry Division gets orders to help relieve Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne is surrounded and outnumbered. Al Torborg spends that winter treating frostbite and combat wounds in equal measure. The cold is its own enemy. Men lose fingers and toes to frostbite. Weapons jam. Equipment fails. And the wounded die faster because their blood freezes. The medic's aid kit becomes nearly useless in the cold. Morphine freezes. Plasma freezes. Blood won't clot properly in sub-zero temperatures. You have to keep supplies inside your uniform next to your body, hoping your own body heat will keep them liquid enough to use. And the Germans keep attacking. Al remembers treating wounded Allied soldiers, French civilians caught in the crossfire, and German soldiers too. Because that's the thing about being a medic. When a wounded man is lying in the snow bleeding out, his nationality stops mattering. Although sometimes, if we advanced real quick, we would find some wounded and we'd take care of them because they're out of the picture anyway. They're harmless, Al said. You kind of feel sorry for them because it could be you lying there. The war is over for them. The German soldiers tell him this directly. This war is over for me. But you have to keep fighting, they say. Those Germans were glad to be done. Al understands something profound in those moments. See, in a strange way, there's a lot of compassion on the battlefield. We all knew the next time it could be you. They were our enemy, yet we had a respect and understanding for what they were going through because we were experiencing it too. It's hard to explain. But Al just did explain it. War reduces humans to their most basic elements: fear, pain, survival, compassion. When you strip away everything else, what remains is surprisingly universal. The 35th Division helps break the German offensive. Bastogne is relieved. Third Army pushes east again, always forward. At spring 1945, the Third Army is racing across Germany now. The Wehrmacht is collapsing. Everyone knows the end is coming, but the dying doesn't stop. Al and Baker Company advance so quickly they overrun German positions before the defenders can retreat. Often we would overrun the areas that we hit with artillery, and there would be a lot of dead Germans, Al remembered. The Germans most of the time took their wounded with them as they retreated, but they left the dead lay. The efficiency of death becomes routine. You stop seeing individuals and start seeing tactical problems. How many wounded can you treat before you have to move again? How do you prioritize when you have 5 men down and can only help 3 before enemy fire drives you to cover? These are the calculations that will haunt medics for the rest of their lives. But amidst the horror, there are moments of absurd normalcy that keep soldiers sane. The fish story. Yes, in the middle of a war, soldiers start fishing with hand grenades. The grenade would blow and all the fish would float to the top. Al recalled with obvious amusement decades later. You had to be careful though, because if you threw the grenade too close to the fish, it would blow the fish to pieces. Then you had nothing. Think about the psychology here. These men are using weapons designed to kill humans to catch dinner. It's insane. It's practical. It's somehow both horrifying and hilarious. This sounds crazy, but the thought of fresh fish fried up was very inspiring, Al said. We would fry them up, and I always tried to fry up some American fries as well for the men. It tasted so good. You can't imagine how big of a treat it was for soldiers on the front line. After months of K-rations and cold showers and sleeping in mud, fresh fish becomes a taste of civilization, a reminder that normal life still exists somewhere beyond the war. But the locals don't appreciate having their fish supply destroyed by American soldiers with grenades. They complain so much that the complaint makes it all the way up to General Patton himself. Patton issues an order: leave the fish alone. The fish fries end. The war continues. April 1945. The Elbe River. The 35th Infantry Division reaches the Elbe, just miles from Berlin. They can see Soviet forces on the other side. The two great armies that have crushed Nazi Germany from opposite directions finally meet. But Al Torborg sees something else along the way. Something that explains why this war had to be fought, why all the death and suffering wasn't meaningless. The camps. The concentration camps. The division encounters camps that the SS tried to evacuate or destroy before the Allies arrived. They find survivors who are barely human anymore, reduced to walking skeletons. They find evidence of industrial-scale murder. This is what they've been fighting. This is why the German medic Al talked to was glad to be out of the war. This is what never again means. Some things are too important for compassion toward the enemy. Al doesn't talk much about the camps in his later interviews. Some memories are too heavy to fully share. But encountering them changes something. The war suddenly has absolute moral clarity. There are just causes for war, and stopping this was one of them. Berlin falls, Hitler dies, Germany surrenders. On May 8, 1945, the war in Europe officially ends. The 320th Regiment returns to England. From there, they'll ship home to America. The 35th Division leaves Southampton on September 5, 1945. 5 days later, they arrive in New York City. We came up the Hudson River and the captain told us, "Look straight ahead," Al remembered. There stood the Statue of Liberty. That was kind of nice. Imagine that moment. You've spent more than a year in combat. You've seen things that will give you nightmares for decades. You've done things you'll never fully talk about. You've lost friends. You've saved lives. You've watched boys become old men in a matter of months. And now, coming up the Hudson River, you see Lady Liberty. Then there was a series of whistles, and again, here came the tugboats to bring us into harbor. Al said, "He's home. He's alive." Somehow, impossibly, he survived. Al Torborg returns to Minnesota. He's discharged from the Army in November 1945. He's 21 years old, but the boy who got drafted at 19 doesn't exist anymore. Now comes the harder part, learning to live with what he saw and did. Decades pass. Al Torborg builds a life, gets married, has a family, works, lives. He carries his war memories quietly, the way most veterans do. He tells some stories to his nephew Dennis as a kid, mentions meeting Patton, mentions the artillery, but doesn't dwell on it. Many veterans don't talk about their experiences. The people who weren't there can't understand. The people who were there don't need it explained. So the stories stay locked inside. But in 2016, something changes. Dennis Wolfe, now an adult and an Army veteran himself, approaches his uncle Al with an idea. Al is 92 years old now. The generation that fought World War II is disappearing. Soon, there won't be anyone left who remembers. Dennis asks if Al would be willing to record his memories. Al says yes. For months, Dennis calls his uncle from Oregon to Minnesota. They talk with a recorder running. Al opens up in ways he never has before. The conversations become transcripts. The transcripts become a memoir. I think at this point in our history, it's important that the stories are told, Dennis said. He's right. Every year we lose more World War II veterans. By 2024, the youngest veterans are in their late 90s. The 80th anniversary of D-Day is likely the last major commemoration that living veterans will attend in significant numbers. That's why Al's story matters. That's why Dennis insisted on recording it. That's why we're telling it now. Because Al Torborg's experiences aren't just about one medic in one war. They're about what humans are capable of, both the worst and the best. They're about finding compassion in impossible circumstances. They're about the choice to run toward suffering instead of away from it. As a medic, maybe he treated some of these soldiers that were wounded, and they survived to come back and live lives, get married and have children and grandchildren, Dennis reflected. Their children and grandchildren will know what their grandpa did in the war, but they won't know what Al did. That's the invisible impact. Somewhere out there are people who exist because Al Torborg saved their grandfather in a French field in 1944. Families that never knew how close they came to not existing. Lives that continued because a 19-year-old kid from Minnesota ran toward the screaming instead of away from it. Enter April 15th, 2024. Al Torborg turns 100 years old. His family throws him a birthday party. When the 35th Infantry Division learns about it, Major General John Ruger, the current division commander, sends a coin and a letter. I was deeply honored to recognize the contributions that Sergeant Torborg made to the war effort and the 35th Infantry Division, Ruger said. It was awe-inspiring to read his story. It's just amazing all the things he's seen and done. We're very proud of our history and our lineage and all that those who came before us in the division did. 100 years. From a farm kid in Minnesota to a combat medic in the European theater. From treating wounded under fire to celebrating a century of life. Al Torborg's story is one of millions from World War II. But that doesn't make it any less extraordinary. Each of those millions of stories represents a person who made choices under impossible circumstances, who faced death and chose duty, who saw humanity at its worst and responded with humanity at its best. The German medic Al talked to on that battlefield in France probably went home too, assuming he survived. He probably had his own story, his own memories of the American medic he worked with across enemy lines. Two men who were supposed to kill each other, choosing instead to save lives together. That's the story within the story. War brings out the worst in humanity, yes. The concentration camps prove that. But war also reveals something else, that even in the darkest circumstances, some people choose compassion. Some people choose to see the humanity in their enemy. Some people refuse to let the horror make them inhuman. Al Torborg was one of those people. He's gone now, but his story remains. Thanks to his nephew Dennis, thanks to the family that insisted on recording his memories, thanks to the 35th Infantry Division that honored his service, Al's story will outlive everyone who knew him personally. And that matters. Because 80 years from now, when World War II is as distant to people as the Civil War is to us, someone might stumble across Al Torborg's story. They might read about the American and German medics who talked to each other across enemy lines. They might wonder if that really happened, if humans can really maintain their humanity even in war. And the answer, documented in Al's own words, will be yes. Yes, it happened. Yes, it matters. Yes, we should remember. The last generation that fought in World War II is leaving us. The burden of remembering falls to us now. We have to be the ones who tell these stories, who ensure that Al Torborg and millions like him aren't forgotten. Because the moment we forget what they went through, what they sacrificed, what they chose to be even when they could have chosen to be something less, that's the moment we risk repeating their mistakes. Al Torborg ran toward the screaming for more than a year. He saved lives we'll never be able to count. He showed compassion to enemies when he could have shown hatred. He came home, built a life, and lived to be 100. And now, thanks to a nephew who cared enough to ask, his story will never die. That's how we honor veterans, not just with medals and monuments, though those matter too. We honor them by remembering their stories, by listening when they're willing to talk, by ensuring that their experiences, their choices, their humanity survives them. Al Torborg's story is now part of the permanent record. It's preserved in his memoir, in the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress, in the memories of the 35th Infantry Division, and now in this retelling. The boy from Minnesota who became a combat medic, who talked to German medics across enemy lines, who survived St. Lo and Bastogne and the Elbe, who met Patton and fished with grenades and saved lives we'll never be able to count. That's Al Torborg's legacy. And it's a legacy worth remembering,